Hi there, welcome to Long Distance Review, and welcome back to my top 20 countdown of albums from 2020. If you've not seen the first part, go back and check that out. That's from numbers 20 to 11. This is numbers 10 to 1. So if you haven't seen that first part, then go back. The video's on my channel. And if you have, thanks very much, and we'll continue the countdown. And if you just don't care about the first part, then we'll just crack on with the top 10. I'll get on with it because there's a lot to get through and they take quite a while. So this is my number 10 of the top 20 albums of 2020. And at number 10 is Trivium with What the Dead Men Say. Trivium have had a very sort of up and down career over the years. They always seem to be on the cusp of breaking through and being massive, and then they seem to release a dud album or a not so good album, let's say. I really enjoyed The Sin and the Sentence, the album prior to this one, and thankfully they've continued that sort of upswing that they had with The Sin and the Sentence, and really produced a great metal album. Anyone who follows Matt Heafy on Twitch or his YouTube videos know what a hugely creative and talented individual he is, and I think this album just shows what an incredibly creative and comfortable band Trivium have become, because this seems so easy for them, but if it was that easy, then 90% of metal bands would be doing exactly the same thing, producing albums of this stellar quality. They mix these huge choruses with these ferocious riffs and melodies, and they do it to such ease that it just seems so straightforward. Check out the sort of more ferocious side of them on songs like Through the Shadows and the Stones, and then you've got the sort of more power metal side of they have with like songs like The Defiant, and then almost black metal side of it, sort of progressive black metal when you get to the end of the album with like Bending the Arc. This is such a solid metal album, and so I think the introduction of Alex Bent as a drummer has really pushed Trivium on to being able to be a more expansive and creative band, and I think the last two albums have shown that. So yeah, a great metal album, and I'm really pleased that Trivium is still doing really, really well after what could have been the sort of derailing around the Silence in the Snow period. So yeah, number 10, Trivium, and What the Dead Men Say. So now on to my number 9. And at number 9 is Greg Puciato with Child Soldier, Creator of God. This is the debut solo album from ex-Dillinger Escape Plan vocalist Greg Puciato, and it was a real triumph, I thought. Greg has got a lot of styles in his oeuvre, let's say, and he has been in other bands obviously, and not just Dillinger Escape Plan, so he has showcased other styles throughout his career, but this album seems to touch on everything he's done throughout his career and more. It can be an overwhelming listen at first. I think it can be a bit sort of like there's too much going on here, but I thought the more time you give this album, the more you appreciate the twists and turns every corner that it has, and creatively it's incredible really the amount of genres he ends up touching on throughout this album. This is exactly kind of what a Greg Puciato album should sound like when you know what he can do and what kind of styles he enjoys and what genres he's been involved in and is into himself. This touches on post-hardcore, this touches on jazz, this touches on shoegaze, this touches on punk, this touches on, you know, you've got dream pop in there, and it just full out pop music, which is something that Greg's really into. So it's no surprise that it should be on here. It is a long album, but I think the more time you give this album, the more you get out of it, and I found it just a really interesting listen. It never dips below a really high bar of fascinating, I found, and I found myself going back to this album more and more, and it's an album I still get more out of the more I listen to it. So yeah, if you're a fan of Dillinger or anything Greg's been in, I think you'll really like this album. His voice on here is beautiful at times. He has that great contradiction in his voice between the big screams and then these beautiful serenades that he can do. So yeah, this is just showcasing Greg's incredible talent. So yeah, number 9 is Greg Puciato. So now on to my number 8. And at number 8 is the inevitable appearance of Deftones with Ohms. I say inevitable because it is pretty much on everyone's best of year lists, but with good reason. I mean, people will go, oh, obviously Deftones are going to be on there, but when you're as good as Deftones, they're always going to be up there. Everything they've released is pretty much gold in my eyes, so I'm not going to try and be a pretentious person and just say no, I'm not going to put Deftones in my top 20, because they are that good, and this album is that good. A lot was made of this album in the fact that it was more of a return to the guitar heavy side of Deftones. Well, personally, I don't think that ever really went away. I think Gore still had a lot of that on, but what I do find with this album is that it's a much more combined and cohesive affair. It feels like the band are all pulling in the right direction together. So I think on that level that this is a better album than Gore. It has the usual Deftones alt metal, new metal sound throughout it, but they do push the synthesizers and effects a bit more here, especially on the album highlight for me, the great song called Pompeii, or Pompeii, I'm not really sure how that's pronounced. And it has the sort of dream pop feel to it at times, that song. And yeah, it's a great Deftones album. Why wouldn't it be? Deftones are great. They release great albums. It's another really great Deftones album. There's not that much more to say about it this time. My review of the album is up on my channel anyway, if you want to hear me go a bit more in depth on it. But yeah, Deftones and Ohms at number 8. So now on to my number 7 of 2020. And in at number 7 on my list is Killer Be Killed with Reluctant Hero. The second appearance, and possibly the only time someone will appear twice on the end of the year list. Greg Puciato appears again. Killer Be Killed are a supergroup of sorts. Greg Puciato on vocals, Troy Sanders, we've got Max Cavalera obviously, and as well as Ben Kohler on drums. So you've got Converge, Soulfly, Ex Sepultura, Mastodon, Dillinger Escape Plan, and amongst others. So you have these real combined huge talents in a supergroup, and inevitably supergroups don't work that well. Well, thankfully this time they do, and on paper it shouldn't work that well, because you have these really 3 distinctive vocal styles that could really be a mess on paper, but don't seem to be at all. They combine all of the sort of talents of each member and the sound of each group really as well. You have the space rock sound of Mastodon in there, as well as the thrashy punk sound of Soulfly. I think the first album, this is their second album, the first album did feel more like a side project as such, and a supergroup and a bit of an experiment. This does feel like more of a band effort. You have songs like Dream Gone Bad with this great spacey rock feel to it, a chugging riff. They sit alongside the much more aggressive thrashy numbers like Filthy Vagabond. I love the way that Troy's and Greg's vocals sort of spar with each other throughout tracks, and then all of a sudden a nail bomb will be thrown in, and yeah, I did use that word. And Max Cavalera will come in with this huge, obvious Max Cavalera vocal bit, and it works brilliantly all the time. I think it's a great album, and it combines all these sort of prog rock elements, thrash elements, space rock, alt rock. It has all this kind of stuff thrown in together, and it's made an incredibly cohesive listen. It's a really, really great album, and I'm really pleased they managed to get together and do another album, because I feel this is better than the first one. So yeah, at number 7 is Killer Be Killed. And now on to number 6. And at number 6 is Palm Reader with Sleepless. Palm Reader are probably UK's rock music's biggest secret, it seems. The post-hardcore group have really come on leaps and bounds, I think, since their last album, Braille. They sound like a much more confident band, and they've used that confidence to really push themselves on this album creatively, I feel. They use a lot more keyboards and synths, not obviously, but in a way to beef up their sound, to make it sound more expansive, more dramatic at times, and it really worked well on these songs. You've got great tracks like Hold Release, which was one of the first singles off the album, with this great driving verse and soaring chorus, and that benefits really much more from this beefier sound they seem to have on this album. Josh's vocals on here work really well. He has this really sort of soft drawl voice at sometimes on these songs, and then also has these great post-hardcore style screams when he gets more furious. Check out some of the stunning songs on here, like the brilliant Willow or A Bird in Its Feathers, and you'll understand what I mean. It's a great mix of the sort of beautiful and savage at the same time, a lot of these songs. And I think Palm Reader should be a bigger band than they are, and Sleepless is a really staggeringly great album. If you've never checked them out before, yeah, go check them out. So at number 6 is Palm Reader and Sleepless. So now on to number 5. And at number 5 is Run the Jewels with Run the Jewels 4. And Run the Jewels are a band that I never really entertained before this album. It's a band that I had heard of, but I sort of wrote them off as a bit of a party hip-hop band. And that's not what they are at all, especially on this album. This is their 4th album, in fact, and it was released during the George Floyd death and the subsequent protests after that. And if an album was written for an exact moment in history, it was this album, it seems. What Killer Mike and LP do brilliantly on this album is effortlessly flip between these party anthems at the start of the album with their alter egos, and they flip to this incredibly politicized and venomous and furious and intense songs and vocals and lyrics that they put in towards the end of the album, in songs like Walking in the Snow, and also listening to it, you're all sort of jarred to attention to listen to what he's saying. It demands your attention. When he has lines like when he's talking about the protests and tragedies that happen, and he says, all you give is a Twitter rant and call it a tragedy, you know, calling out people's apathy, and you almost feel guilty for listening to it and thinking, I've seen that happen, and that, you know, people like me do that. It's an incredibly relevant album. I don't think there is a more relevant album released this year than this album, and it's an album I still listen to now. Still seems just as relevant as when it dropped. It's an album that really is an essential listen, I think, this year. It's an album that demands your attention, and you should listen to it. It's a brilliant album, and I think as a band who are very relevant and have a lot to say. And on a lighter note, it was great to hear Zach De La Rocha back on the great song called Just. He still sounds fiery and as venomous as he ever did in Rage Against the Machine, so that's brilliant. So yeah, at number 5 is Run the Jewels.
Never forgetting the story of Jesus, the hero was killed by mistake. Just got done walking in the snow. Goddamn that motherfucker cold. Just got done walking in the snow.
So now on to number 4. And at number 4 is Biffy Clyro with A Celebration of Endings. This is Biffy Clyro's 8th studio album. That's not including the Balance Not Symmetry soundtrack album they did. And the Scottish alt-rock band have started out life as a bit more of a creative math rock post-hardcore, post-rock style band, and have sort of progressed into this alt-rock stadium band along the way, but maintained their own identity that really is purely Biffy Clyro. But their last album, Ellipsis, was kind of a drop-off to me. It was the first time that I thought, okay, this is just an okay album. It just sounded like them doing stadium rock, better than a lot of other bands, but it didn't have the twists and turns I wanted from Biffy Clyro. So I was really pleased when A Celebration of Endings came out, and it was back to their invention and creativity that they have in them. Biffy can write run-of-the-mill, not run-of-the-mill, that's the wrong way, can write stadium hook-laden rock songs better than most people. They do that on here with songs like Tiny Indoor Fireworks, but they can also write these twisting and turning, surprising and shocking numbers like the prog rock closer, Cop Syrup, which actually returned Simon Neil's screamed vocals, which we haven't heard for a long, long time, which was brilliant to hear, even for a brief moment. I think writing the Balance Not Symmetry soundtrack album has helped them. The pressure was off on that album. It wasn't a Biffy Clyro studio album, it was them doing something, artworks, an art project for themselves. And I think that creativity bled a bit more into this album. You have songs like End Of, which is musically captivating throughout that song. It has this thunderous and blinding riff and pummeling bass throughout it. And even the saccharine ballad like Space doesn't feel bad on this album. It feels emotionally pulling and really beautiful. I think Biffy Clyro are more than just your run-of-the-mill alt-rock band that some people lump them into. They are better than all of those bands, and it's so good to have them back doing something as interesting as this album is. So yeah, my number 4 for this year is Biffy Clyro, A Celebration of Endings. And now number 3. And number 3 is Code Orange and Underneath. Code Orange promised to be the big, 2020 promised to be the big breakout year for Code Orange, and there was a lot of hype surrounding them at the start of the year. And I feel they were a real victim of the COVID pandemic, because I reckon they had a lot of things planned for this year that got completely scuppered by unable to tour. So the release of this album was slightly more, not muted, but understated than I reckon it should have been. Still, they released this follow-up to their last album, Forever, at the start of this year, and the metallic hardcore crew have added probably more industrial effects to their songs, more synths and loops than before, more glitches than before, certainly in songs like Erasure Scan and In Fear. But the band have also employed this more alt-rock 90s feel to some of their songs, and they pushed Reba's vocals to the front more than ever before, and it works brilliantly. It works with real great effect on songs like the title track Underneath is a brilliant song. This band are continually evolving all the time, and I feel that Code Orange are streets ahead of a lot of other hardcore bands, even just normal run-of-the-mill metal bands. They're just better than everyone else, and they seem to have more ideas than everyone else. They seem to be streets ahead of everyone else, and when other people catch up, they've already moved on to do other things. God knows where this band are going to go next. They seem to be constantly evolving and moving forward, and that's what makes them such a fascinating band in my eyes. I think that they are probably the most exciting metal band on the planet, and if you've never checked them out before, then you really should get on board. So yeah, my number 3 is Code Orange and Underneath. And now on to my number 2. And my number 2 this year is Panic Machine by Gold Key. Gold Key are a supergroup of sorts, really. They're a UK alt-rock band, but they consist of members from Gallows and also Sixth, amongst others as well. So they are a supergroup of sorts, and this is their second studio album. If you like bands like Muse and early Muse, let's say Pink Floyd, maybe alt rock, Baroness, any sort of 90s grunge stuff. Gold Keys sit amongst that kind of thing, but this album just beautifully flows, I think, from start to finish, from opening song like Sweet Darkness right to the end of the album with the song Best of Luck. This feels like a real journey, and it soars and it's majestic at times. You have the vocalist Steve Sears, his vocals like falsetto at points and times, but it's not overpowering and it's subdued enough to let the music flow underneath, and I think that works incredibly well. You get these highlights like songs like the more hardcore styling Don't Sleep, the beautiful songs like Fly Into the Sun. You got the Muse-esque sounding Strain, and yeah, you've got all this stuff bundled in together, and it just is a beautiful listen from start to finish. This album, this is a stunning rock record, really, that really encapsulates exactly what it's trying to do. It has a real sense of atmosphere about it, bleakness, and it feels like a real through line through the entire album. I love this album from start to finish. I mean, I'm a big 90s fan anyway, but this encapsulates a lot of that and also uses a lot more modern sounds throughout it. I think if you've never heard of Gold Key, check out Panic Machine. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. So my number 2, Gold Key, Panic Machine. So now, finally, onto my number 1 album of 2020. And at number 1 is the band Envy with the album The Fallen Crimson. I've got a friend to thank for this one because I never even heard of Envy before a friend texted me and said, you might like this album, I think it's kind of your thing, Envy, The Fallen Crimson. And I sort of, I'll check it out at some point in time, as you do. And I remember one day just thinking, I'll stick that album on that guy recommended. You know who you are, by the way, I don't need to name you. And it just stopped me in my tracks. I don't know if you've ever found that with music. Sometimes you just put something on and you physically can't do anything else. And I just sat there and listened to the entire album without moving, really, and just thought, what a stunning album this is. Envy are a post-rock, post-hardcore band from Japan, and they're actually onto their 3rd decade of being in existence. I guess they're kind of underground cult heroes in their genres, but if you look back in 2016, vocalist Tetsuya Fukuyama, pronunciation probably badly, left the band, and they were sort of in turmoil by the sounds of it. There was a bit of a turbulent period where no one really knew if they were going to release new music, and then they kind of got back. The vocalist came back surprisingly in 2018, and then this album dropped really without any fanfare or any hype in 2020. I find, this is their 7th album, by the way, as well. I find this album overwhelming at times, I really do. It has these blasts of furious post-hardcore styles mixed with this fragile post-rock arrangements throughout it. You get the buzzsawing opening of the song Statement of Freedom, and then followed up with like furious songs like Marginalized Thread. Sorry, I keep forgetting the names of these songs. And then amongst that you get these incredibly delicate and fragile, beautiful songs like Rhythm and the outstanding Hikari, which just absolutely blows me away every time I hear it. They have these delicate guitar tones and piano tones that just feel like they're just fragile and about to break, and employing the female vocalists on songs just gives it this incredibly beautiful and fragile tone to it. I'm yet to find an album like this, really, and this album's absolutely blown me away. I haven't stopped listening to it. I find it's a real treat to listen to it. I have to sit down. I've never just picked out a track from it going, I'll listen to Statement of Freedom, love that song. If I listen to this, I sit down from start to finish for an hour and do nothing else and just listen to it. That's how much I fall in love with this album. And The weird thing is with me is I love this album so much that I'm too scared to go back and try any of other albums by Envy in case they're not as good as this, and it puts me off a bit. Maybe one day I will go back and try them. But yeah, so that's it really for me. My number one album of 2020 is Envy with The Fallen Crimson. Thanks for sticking with me if you have done for this whole list, and I'll be back in 2021 with some new reviews. Let me know what your number one album of this year was, and I'll and comment, subscribe, like, all that kind of thing. And yeah, have a good Christmas and a good New Year, and let's pray that 2021 is a much better year than this year personally, and we can have touring music again. That would be nice. So thanks very much, and see you soon.